Welcome everybody to this virtual council meeting of Norwich City Council. This meeting is being held under the Local Authorities and Police and Crime Panels Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authorities and Police and Crime Commissioner Crime Panel Meetings, England and Wales, Regulations 2020, meaning that decisions made will have the same validity as those made at a meeting held at City Hall. We have elected members of the council attending the meeting. We also have the council's monitoring officer as part of the meeting, as well as democratic service staff to record the votes. Members must be able to hear and, where practical, see other members. Therefore, we ask all members to keep their video on during the business of the meeting. The recording of this meeting will appear on the council's YouTube channel, and the meeting will be live streamed. If we are notified that this link is not working, we will take a short adjournment while the issue is resolved. And ask participants to ensure that they are muted when not speaking, or you may be muted by an officer to maintain audio quality. The chat function is enabled for members to report technical difficulties and to indicate that they would like to speak on an item, but you will only be able to message the chair and democratic services. If you wish to speak on an item, please use the chat function to indicate during the item. Please do not indicate via chat for future items. Voting will be by exception. This means that I will ask for votes against, then abstentions, and the remainder of the members present will be therefore be voting in favour. Although I will still ask you to raise your hand in favour. I ask at the appropriate time you raise your hand clearly in front of your screen and keep it there until we move to the next part of the vote. Please bear with us while we count the votes. This may take a little longer than usual as officers check between screens to ensure all members have been seen. I've received apologies from Councillor Davies for tonight. Others? No. And the Lord Mayor's announcements. I'd like to invite Councillor Beth Jones to say a few words about ex-councillor Chris Herries, who sadly passed away recently. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In August, sadly, we lost Chris Herries, former Lakenham Labour councillor, who died unexpectedly. I'd like to take a few minutes just to reflect on the contribution of our friend and colleague that she made throughout her very full life, both politically, but on a more personal level for so many of us. Life brought Chris full circle. She was born in rural Norfolk, and one of her first jobs was a lab technician in the science department at UEA in the 1960s, on what's now the University Village site. She left Norfolk to train as a teacher in Walsall and went on to spend many years in the south of England, in Devon, Cornwall and East Sussex. In 2013, Chris returned to Norfolk to enjoy, to quote her, a quiet retirement and a little bit of Labour Party campaigning. Well, like everything Chris did, a little didn't last and quickly transformed into her becoming a city councillor for Lakenham. Having previously stood as a parliamentary candidate in the South West, in rural seats where victories were beyond the realms of possibility.
Slightly better.
She was truly humbled to be elected and took the responsibility very much to heart. While she lived in the city centre, when it came to choosing allotment, she chose Lakenham, as this meant having a stake in her ward. And that's where more than a few of us have spent an afternoon digging over beds, fixing sheds or picking vegetables over the last few years. Joining her there was a lovely escape from the city. In a single term as a city councillor, she became chair of planning and then joined the cabinet as cabinet member for Safer, Stronger Neighbourhoods. Her portfolio combining many of her true passions, historic buildings, community engagement, and of course the cooperative agenda. Chris was the epitome of a true cooperator through and through. Formerly on the board of the Cooperative Group, a multi-million-pound organisation, but more recently chair of the Labour's sister party, the Cooperative Party. She began my cooperative education, making it far more than that dividend card in my purse. And she applied these principles in her involvement in cooperative housing, education, and of course, Norwich Mustard. Standing down from the City Council in 2018, she declared this really was now retirement, but of course that was far from the truth. Tony increased her involvement in both Norwich Historic Churches Trust and Norwich Consolidated Charities as one of their most motivated trustees. When I was trying to think about themes when writing this, it was Chris's commitment to young people, to education, and her own ageless quality, which had been a continuous thread through her life. Appalled by the use of corporal punishment on children when she taught in a primary school, she would not sit back, and she went on to found her own school, initially in a garage, for that child and other children from that school, which grew over several years. More recently, she was chair of Anguish's Educational Foundation, providing grants for educational purposes, and won the leads on Norwich Historic Churches Trust's Inspiration art project for children in their churches. On a more personal level, she happily let me take over her house in the 2015 general election and allowed 30 Labour students to take over. I'm not sure many people would have done that. I could talk for far too long about her public achievements, but for many of us here and those people whose lives she impacted quietly as both a councillor, friend and colleague, we will remember less high profile, but just as much about her. In the days after her death, I spoke to people across the country and as far afield as South Africa and heard so many amazing stories about the imprint she left on their lives and their abiding memories. Anyone who visited her during a test match or the Ashes could be guaranteed that there was commentary streaming on her iPad, although I'm still none the wiser as to what was actually being talked about. A Somerset fan, she particularly enjoyed a number of recent trips to Lord's pre-pandemic. And if you dropped in for coffee or a glass of wine, you were guaranteed a selection of biscuits, or to quote one of my cabinet colleagues and one of her former lodgers, a never-ending supply of salty snacks or homemade ready meals dug from the depths of her freezer. For others, the first question they asked me was about Pud, her cat, her incredibly fussy, fabulous, furry cat, who only ate certain flavours of whiskers and would challenge Chris with hunger strike and always win if she dared to change that. And really, really happy that she now has a home with another of our council colleagues. Chris's quiet generosity has touched so many people's lives in our city and around the world. Nothing was too difficult, and it was always done without drama or seeking recognition. Her fight for equality took so many forms, both in the Labour movement, in the many co-ops she was involved with, and numerous community organisations. Her frustration at and desire to address the root causes of inequality was one of our last conversations we had over a socially distanced glass of wine less than a week before she died. Chris, you left this fight too early. There's far too much left to do. But as you were a great supporter of the next generation, and particularly of women in politics, I'll keep fighting for you. And I'm sure there are many others whose lives you've touched who will do so too, for a better future. We can collaborate and cooperate together and make that change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. I think it's appropriate to have a 1 minute silence to recognise that. Thank you. Thank you. In the next item, item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest to make on any items on the agenda? I'll get in there first and declare a pecuniary interest on motion 10A, and I've been granted a dispensation. Okay.
Motion 10A, dispensation granted. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Pecuniary interest on motion 10A. pecuniary interest in motion 10A, and I have applied for a dispensation. I don't know if that's been received or I'll.
It has. Yes.
It has. Great, thanks.
Pecuniary interest in item 10A as a renter. A dispensation received from the monitoring officer.
Thank you.
Here I have a pecuniary interest in 10A.
Pecuniary interest in item 10A, and I have a dispensation granted by the monitoring officer.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, pecuniary interest in item 10A as well as the renter.
Okay, thank you. Any more for any more? No. Got all that covered. Thank you. Questions from the public. One public question has been received. The question is from Miss Emma Hampton. Miss Hampton, would you like to please ask your question? You have 3 minutes. Sorry? Oh, she just. Wait, let's see. Okay. Hampton, she's there somewhere. Okay. Yeah. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Could the leader comment on whether he thinks now, in the middle of a pandemic, and with, sorry, was never mind. Can the leader comment on whether he thinks now, in the middle of a pandemic, and with local governments still living with the enhanced consequences of 10 years of extreme austerity, reorganisation should be either the priority of this government or council?
Well, thank you, Emma, for this most timely of questions. We have yet to have sight of the provisionally named Devolution and Recovery White Paper. However, the direction of the government, or rather 10 Downing Street, wishes to take has been widely trailed. Putting aside the usual consultation verbiage, the ambition is in two-tier areas like our own, with the county council and district councils, to create large unitary authorities with a minimum population size of between 300,000 and 500,000. And these new councils would underpin combined authorities across a wider area, for example, Norfolk and Suffolk. And the cherry on top is an elected mayor, at least a cherry for this government. This would be the end of local councils, particularly cities like Norwich, that geographically reflect the communities they represent. And that is the end of over 900 years of self-government. So what is the reason behind this push? Apparently, the motivation is driven by economic necessity. The argument goes that COVID-19 has changed the economy, and so therefore local government must also change to facilitate economic recovery. Now, Professor Colin Copus, an expert on local government, has made the point that there is no evidence that changing lines on maps facilitates a healthy economy. Achieving that, in his opinion, is best delivered through giving councils additional resources, powers, and broader responsibilities. Nor is there any reliable evidence that makes cost-efficient and effective service delivery contingent on having very large units of local government. Common sense would also suggest that this is hardly the time to subject local communities and local councils to costly upheaval. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We anticipate major economic disruption, the worst by some estimates in nearly 300 years. And we are adjusting at the end of this year to the consequences of a no deal or thin deal Brexit. There is reputational damage both to government and to local government if the public see that time and resources is being spent on an abstract and self-indulgent exercise. And frankly, there is the lack of a glittering prize. Many colleagues will remember the last round of devolution deals in 2015. And certainly in Norfolk and Suffolk, these were underpowered in terms of additional resources and powers. What was offered was less collectively than the money councils were losing through continued cuts in central government funding. And so we are in 2020, and there needs to be a reality check about how genuine the commitment is by government to devolving power and resources to local government, and beyond that to local communities. Over the last decade, we have continued to lose funding and powers. This is set to continue with proposals for planning decisions being removed largely from councils. Another central government grab. The failure of government to honour refunding councils for the impact of COVID tells us all we need to know about the likely paltry deal devolution will give us. In short, what government is promising with its devolution plans is only slightly more convincing than Dominic Cummings' explanation that he needed to go to Barnard Castle in County Durham to check his eyesight. There is a rumour that government is tilting away from devolution and restructuring and more towards recovery. And that could be a grudging admission that the less than stellar performance by private contractors to deliver world-class response to the COVID-19 pandemic leaves the Johnson-Cummings government leading local government alongside the NHS as their key partner to see the country through the very difficult times ahead. In conclusion, this potential pause is an opportunity for local government collectively to insist that any future discussion about devolution has to be conditional on repairing the damage of 10 years of needless austerity, building a sustainable model for the funding of local government, and giving councils the means to help the recovery of the communities they represent, and collectively through that process, help the country do the same. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walton. Ms Hampton, you're allowed one supplementary question. Do you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Waters, that covered it all. Thank you.
Thank you for attending the meeting tonight, Ms Hampton. Officers will remove from the meeting, and you're welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting on the Council's YouTube channel. Thank you. Petitions. We have received 2 petitions. The first petition is being presented by Ms Teresa Belton. Ms Belton, will you please present your petition?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to present the petition Norwich People Before Tennis Courts, which now has been signed by 680 local people. The text of the petition says, "We, the undersigned, call on the Cabinet of Norwich City Council to leave the old lawn tennis courts in Higham Park as green space for community use and wildlife, and to redirect the approximately £200,000 earmarked to create hard floodlit courts towards spending that will benefit local people in real urgent need." Why is this important? Many Norwich residents are facing hardship, and needs are going unmet, as shown in a recent report in the Eastern Evening News, and the petition has a link to a report of people living in flats in Goldwell Square calling on the City Council to install a secure entry system to the flats due to their experiencing an intolerable level of drug taking and dealing by non-residents on their stairs and landings. On top of deep cuts in government funding following years of austerity, the City Council has seen a huge loss of income due to COVID-19 and now says that it is looking into a financial black hole. The funds intended for the expansion of the facilities for tennis players would be far more justly spent on addressing urgent everyday needs, such as accommodation for the homeless, community safety measures, and more children's play areas. And in addition, I'd like to make the following points. There is already good provision of courts within easy walking distance of Higham Park at Eaton Park and Lime Tree Road. Despite a request, no feasibility study for the planned courts has been provided. The City Council's claim that all-weather courts at Higham Park, together with courts at Harford and Lakenham, will produce an income of £1 million over 15 years simply doesn't seem credible. in public consultation on the planning application for the hard courts attracted objections from 117 individuals, but only 10 people spoke in support. Going ahead regardless of this overwhelming rejection makes a mockery of the public consultation process. Flood lighting would disrupt local wildlife. Research shows that urban lighting is causing a massive decline in insect numbers, yet with badly insects. Introducing flood lighting into this green space would therefore be ecologically irresponsible and would also create a nuisance for nearby residents. And I just have one more point to make.
Sorry, Ms. Belton, you've gone over the your petition as a statement. Thank you very much for that. We have an electronic copy of your petition. Thank you for attending the meeting tonight. Officers will remove you from the meeting now. Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry, sorry, Councillor Packer. My apologies. Yes, Councillor Packer. Would you give a response to the petition?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Teresa, for taking the time and effort to create this petition. I think it is important to clarify that the funding which is referred to in this petition has been committed to the expansion of Norwich Park's tennis. This will involve the creation of all-weather tennis courts at both Lakenham Rec and Hyam Park. Moving on to the expansion of Norwich Park's tennis, the works form part of our capital budget, which is funded from capital receipts. Norwich City Council has 3 pots of funding: its general fund for everyday services, the housing revenue account involving all costs associated with the council housing stock, and finally the capital budget. There are statutory restrictions on the use of capital receipts, which mean they cannot be used to support ongoing revenue expenditure. This means that the capital receipts cannot be used for everyday services. Vital services, such as our 100% council tax reduction policy for the city's most vulnerable residents, come from the general fund. We could not, for instance, use money from our capital fund to pay to fix any antisocial behaviour damage caused within our parks. Norwich City Council has had to make in-year savings due to the impact of COVID-19 and underfunding from central government. Importantly, we cannot use the funding committed to the expansion of Norwich Park's tennis to plug this shortfall. The tennis expansion project is funded through a mixture of grant funding and the council's own capital resources. We have secured £171,000 of external funding for this project. It would not be possible to reallocate these grants. Stopping work at Hyam Park could increase the costs of works to Lakenham Rec due to reduced economies of scale achieved through the procurement process. Moving on to your question of why this project is going ahead, one of the key objectives of the council is to invest to enable people to live well. This includes providing means for healthy, connected, fulfilling lives and ensuring there is a range of leisure opportunities and activities for all. This expansion of Norwich Park's tennis will see investment in the wards of Nelson and Lakenham, 2 wards which vary considerably when you look at employment and health outcomes. When this project was developed, the following were some of the positive outcomes identified through having courts in both parks. Firstly, improved mental and physical health. The sport provides significant proven physical and mental health benefits to participants, helps to tackle issues like obesity, brings individuals together, and combats loneliness. Secondly, this project will provide access to sports facilities all year round, with extended length of play during the day, rather than just for a limited number of months during the summer. All of this at an affordable cost, currently just £35 per year per household. As well as the low-cost membership, a number of additional free sessions are made available to members of the public and schools. There is demand for access to more tennis courts. Membership of Norwich Park's tennis has increased this year from February to July by 34%. Thirdly, this project will seek to reduce antisocial behaviour. Through increased access to the sports facilities, we expect an increased usage of the 2 parks, and as a direct result, a reduction in antisocial behaviour. Fourthly, the expansion will generate income that will not only cover annual maintenance costs, but also contribute to a sinking fund. This will ensure long-term financial sustainability. Based on historical usage, the courts at Hyam Park will be a hub. It will generate income for the whole project to support the provision and maintenance of lesser used but still important community courts in other parks, such as Lakenham Rec. Norwich-run councils have a proud history of creating, protecting and supporting our parks and open spaces to ensure that residents can benefit. This project will enable residents to access sports facilities year-round at both Lakenham Rec and Hyam Park at affordable costs. In line with local government legislation, the capital receipts required for the expansion of the tennis courts cannot be legally used to fund the revenue costs of everyday service needs highlighted in this petition. Boris Johnson and Conservative MPs may not believe in following the rule of law. I, however, will not, and indeed cannot, endorse this council to follow a similar path. Ultimately, the expansion of Norwich Park's tennis will lead to the improved mental and physical health and well-being of Norwich residents. In the meantime, as we progress achieving this enhancement, I would once again like to thank you for your petition and the opportunity to explain in detail why and how we will deliver this improvement.
Thank you very much, Councillor Becker. Dalton, we have an electronic copy of your petition. Thank you for attending the meeting tonight. Officers will remove you from the meeting and you're welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting on the Council's YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
The second petition being presented is by Mr. Hugo Malik. Mr. Malik, would you please present your petition?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I started this petition in the autumn of 2019 and received well over 200 signatures in no time at all in my local ward, before general election campaigning and then lockdown curtailed local community activity. Since lockdown eased, unlike some charities and some political parties, I've thought it inappropriate to door knock in case residents are vulnerable or self-isolating. However, I can only imagine the numbers of signatures we would have received in a normal year on the doorstep, as the petition has received universal support. Modern building methods are blamed for reducing suitable nesting sites, leading us to losing up to half of our breeding swifts in the last 20 years. This petition calls for a simple and cheap scheme that will increase biodiversity and encourage wildlife to thrive. All new developments over 5 meters in height should be required to install swift bricks, with a minimum of 3 per dwelling, and commercial developments will require 1 swift brick per 50 square meters of floor space. Lockdown gave us the opportunity to slow down and to appreciate our natural surroundings. Nature was allowed to regroup all too briefly. The arrival of the swift starting over our towns and cities with clear blue skies overhead is the quintessential image of the wonders and joys of nature, a quintessential image of rejuvenation and of hope, and a sign of brighter days ahead after the darkness, something we could all do with in the current times. We must do all we can to encourage the swift population to return to its former levels, starting from next spring. The petition in full is, in the UK, we've lost nearly half of our breeding swifts in the last 20 years, and the summer of 2019 saw the lowest levels of swifts returning to our shores. We call on Norwich City Council to install swift bricks on all new suitable council properties over 5 meters tall, to look at suitable nesting possibilities on all existing council properties, and to amend the local plan so it is a requirement for all new private developments over 5 meters tall to install swift bricks. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Malik. Councillor Maguire, would you please give your response to the petition?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And thank you, Hugo, for your question on the issue of biodiversity. The plight of swifts is indeed of serious concern, alongside many other species. The National Planning Policy Framework, which is used to assess all planning applications, states that planning policies and decisions should contribute to providing net gains for biodiversity. Our local plan policy, DM6, states that the development proposals that deliver significant benefits or enhancements to local biodiversity or geodiversity will be strongly supported and encouraged. The use of these policies has resulted in biodiversity improvements to schemes to include bird boxes and the provision of new habitats on development sites. It also means that landscaping schemes associated with new developments have equal regard to biodiversity as they do to the aesthetics. Swifts are migratory birds and only spend the summer months within the UK, late April until July. They stay long enough in the UK to breed and then migrate south. The fall in the number of swifts is considered to be occurring for a number of reasons, to include a lack of insect food, the changing climate, and a reduction in the number of suitable nesting sites. This fall in numbers has led them to being placed on the amber list of the birds of conservation concern. As a species that utilises human-made nests to include swift bricks, the council's planning team often considers swifts as one of the birds that developments can benefit, and as such frequently requests swift boxes are installed in suitable buildings. Works which benefit the wider ecosystem are also important to the swift's survival, especially in relation to measures that can improve insect numbers and species distribution. These normally include landscape schemes which have selected native species which are particularly popular with insects. Thinking about the future, the Environment Bill, as it stands, will require local nature recovery strategies, LNRSs, nice snappy acronym, that will have to be drawn up. LNRSs will be a new system of spatial strategy for nature. They will identify the opportunities and priorities for enhancing biodiversity and support wider objectives such as mitigating or adapting to climate change. As part of this work, consideration of any focus on particular species is anticipated, which may include swifts. A council-wide biodiversity strategy is also in the process of being created, which will tie together the current work which is being done to improve biodiversity and include an action plan. I am happy that we consider these and other biodiversity steps as part of our biodiversity strategy. The local plan will not be undergoing a review until next year at the earliest, when the Greater Norwich local plan policy content is clear. Whether we will be able to review all our policies will depend on the outcome of the planning white paper, which currently proposes to deal with development management policies at a national level. And therefore, that might limit our ability to require such things through the planning system in future. However, I would be more than happy that this is explored as part of the review of policies if we are able to do this. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Maguire. Thank you, Mr. Malik. We have an electronic copy of your petition. Thank you for attending the meeting tonight. Officers will remove you from the meeting now, and you're welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting on the Council's YouTube channel. Thank you. So, item 4, the minutes. I call upon Councillor Waters to move the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of July 2020.
Formally moved, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I call upon Councillor Bergline to second the minutes.
Formally seconded, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. We'll now move to the vote. All those against? Abstentions? In favour? You confirm the resolutions are being carried. Item 5, questions to Cabinet members and committee chairs. There are 17 questions from members to the Council, to Cabinet members, of which notice has been given in accordance with the provisions of Appendix 1 of the Council's Constitution. A copy will be available on the Council's website. Members who have asked questions are permitted. Oh, Councillor Neil, do you have a commentary question?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Thanks to Cabinet Member for the comprehensive answer, and I'm pleased you are considering alternative uses for these sites, especially if they're appropriate for additional social housing development. Of course, I agree at this moment we need to prioritise work streams to what are legal requirements and most beneficial to our residents. Although 504 is a large number of unlet garages, it's only slightly higher than the year's average and presumably the norm. So when council levels return to expected and COVID restrictions decrease, would it be appropriate not only to review possible other uses, but to be more proactive and place for let signages on vacant garages and explore using professional agents to promote these valuable income resources?
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. As I said, I was already aware of the situation, and it was a matter of prioritisation for the team. As you know, council officers have been working really hard, as always, but it's been especially difficult in these last few months where some officers have had to cover for different jobs. I take what you say about being proactive. We did try this a couple of years ago, but I'm more than happy to ask my head of housing, once we've got the team up and running at full strength, to see if we can do something else to promote the use of the garages as garages. But we are always on the lookout as well for housing garage sites which can be converted to housing, and we've done that very successfully in partnership with some of our housing associations in the past. So it's a very valid point that you have raised, and it will not be lost. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for that, and I look forward to picking that up on a meeting we have in the future.
Thank you. Question 2. Councillor Osborne, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Maguire, for your response, and I very much welcome the continued rollout of Solar Together, especially the inclusion of battery storage, which was something that I suggested at the last SEEP meeting. You were at the time quite sceptical, so I'm glad that you've now come on board with that. However, when you consider that we need to be aiming for about 10 times more domestic solar in Norwich than we currently have, according to some modelling, it's clear that the current efforts are falling well short of what's necessary, which leads me back to my original question. 15 months ago, you said that you would produce a report on new models of financing for solar power. What have you done towards that aim?
Thank you. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Osborne, for your supplementary question. I must admit, I don't recognise your comment regarding battery scepticism. My recollection at the time is we were waiting to see how the technology improved. So there was no scepticism. Might I also add that you might say you introduced the idea of it, but I would also point out questions from Councillor Wright quite a while ago, also asking about the use of battery storage. As to your specific question about financial models and the motion that came forward pre-COVID, this is going to be a new era, a new way of measuring time, BCV, before the COVID virus. And before that, much has happened, but you will recall that following the point and discussion on solar and the report and part 3, SEEP has began to look at that, and it will be something we'll look at further. As the kind of actual financial modelling, I know that you had a meeting with Councillor Kendrick asking for how finance might be modelled in a different way. And you had your answer from him at the time, but we will continue to look at the idea, and if we can find one that is viable and that fits in with our over economic situation, bearing in mind the COVID business alone, then of course we do promote it, and as my main answer reflects, you'll find the action part of the strategy, of our environmental strategy, sets out some of those steps. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Question 3. Councillor Graham, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, I do. Thank you for your answer. I'm pleased to see your recognition that environmental impacts, mitigations and costs are not yet fully understood, even though you supported the road up till now. If it's premature to reconsider the decision now, then when will it be the right time? Given the opposition from Norfolk Wildlife Trusts and many other organisations, what more evidence do you need to see that the damage done to native species cannot be mitigated to the satisfaction of experts in the field, despite the requirement for so-called net biodiversity gain? And what would it take to reprioritise the hundreds of millions of pounds that would be better spent up front on the public transport promised, or on other infrastructure, such as keeping children's centres open, rather than a redundant road?
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Councillor Stannard, would you like to reply?
I'll just deal with the latter part first, and I think my colleague Councillor Packer has already dealt with the issue of spending capital on revenue for services. So I think the example of asking the county council to divert capital to revenue, I think is really not realistic. And of course, it is a county council matter. The other thing I'd just like to say, Leslie, I'd like to congratulate you on again finding yet another way to ask exactly the same questions I've been asked several times over the last year or 18 months in council, and I've given you exactly the same answer today as I've given previously, that we will wait until we've seen the environmental impact assessment, and then we will weigh that up with all the other issues. So when you say what will it take for us to review our position, I'll say to you what I said previously and have said several times: we need to see the environmental impact assessment. I'm sure there are organisations that you've quoted who have their own particular view on this and their own particular stance. We will look at that assessment alongside all the other evidence. So my answer is nothing has changed. Absolutely nothing has changed. The answer is exactly as it was. And when we've got all that information and we can make a balanced decision, we will do it. And I look forward to, I'm really interested to see how you or one of your colleagues manages to raise the same question another time over the course of the next few months. Best of luck with that. I hope you can be really creative.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. Question 4. Councillor Carlo, do you have a supplementary question? Carlo?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Beg your pardon. Yes, thank you, Councillor Maguire, for your question. As a councillor in 2014 to 15, I promoted the inclusion of the Development Management Plan Policy DM6i on biodiversity enhancement in the built environment, and the inclusion of important features such as swift bricks. The council's planning policies on occasions do include the provision of bird and bat boxes, but unfortunately they also include ripping out a lot of shrubs, trees and scrub important for insects, for birds, and bats, resulting in a net overall loss of biodiversity. Therefore, will the City Council seriously treat the need to increase biodiversity in the built environment and to sign up to the Wild East initiative and set aside 20% of the council estate for biodiversity, please?
Thank you. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I see I now have 2 portfolios. And so I will answer at a general level, but I'm not going to dare step on the toes of Councillor Stannard, who is an expert on planning and some of the implications. I will just address the general point about promotion of biodiversity. I think this council has had a long and noble history in promoting biodiversity, you might identify a little bit of scrubland, I believe it was on one occasion at the end of a car park, which when it was tidied up was created an outrage in the reduction of biodiversity. However, all our steps, all our policies, and our forthcoming biodiversity strategy, which Councillor Packer will be spearheading and driving forward, all refute your basic stance. We promote and we enhance biodiversity.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Maguire. Question 5. Councillor Price, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Lord Mayor. Thank you. Thank you to the Cabinet Member for his answer. You say in your answer that the Council did not receive City Cycle Ambition Grant funding for the Green Pedalway, which would have allowed it to introduce 20 mph speed limits in much of Thorpe Hamlet. This simply is not the case. Norwich was awarded £685,000 to make significant improvements to crossings and access for cyclists at the Earlham Five Ways roundabout in June 2018. At the same time, the city was awarded £1 million to make significant improvements for cyclists and pedestrians along the Green Pedalway. Why was none of that amount used to introduce 20 mph limit outside Limewood Junior School and make the journey to school safer for the children who go there?
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Stannard. Sorry, you need to turn your mic on, Councillor Stannard. Can't hear you.
So the whole issue here, Ben, is that the grant, the funding for all these reduced limits comes from external grant funding, and we can only spend that money in areas where the grant funding is intended to be applied. And sadly, that's not been possible up until now in Thorpe Hamlet. But what I can assure you is that County have now agreed to fund speed limits elsewhere. And obviously, I would ask you to direct your question to them now.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. Councillor Chmira, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you very much to the Cabinet Member for his detailed answer. However, as I say, I do have a supplementary, given the move towards the alfresco revolution that the government and local authorities seem to be pursuing. And as a result, it seems clear that the light touch approach that Councillor Maguire mentioned in his answer regarding temporary event notices is creaking at the seams and is very unsatisfactory to many residents who have no say before premises suddenly get licenses for a relatively prolonged, albeit continual period. And so I'd like to ask the Cabinet Member, will he join me in expressing our concern that the statutory licensing guidance nationally for so-called TENs, these temporary event notices, does need reform to prevent it from being abused?
Thank you. Councillor Maguire?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you. We move on to question 7. Councillor Joseph, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Kendrick, for your response. I'd like to ask, though, if you're aware, as I'm sure many other councillors are, that delays to MPS repairs go back years, well before lockdown. What measures are being taken beyond simply meeting with staff to ensure that the work is being done on time?
I just say that if any councillors do have problems from their constituents regarding repairs, then they should obviously go through the council system, and those complaints will be investigated, and they will be raised with MPS and hopefully dealt with. At the end of the day, we do have a monitoring policy in regards to MPS's work. As has been stated, there have been difficulties, especially past, and in regards to the COVID outbreak. But as I once again repeat, if councillors do have problems, please report that through the council civica system, and it will be dealt with.
Thank you. Councillor Bergline, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that it would be very welcome indeed if Canterbury Place would be considered for an estate aesthetics project, given how long residents have been waiting for improvements there. Could you also please commit to putting the adopted path that you talk about in your answer on a regular maintenance schedule to ensure that they will not be missed out again, please?
Thank you. Councillor Maguire?
With regard to estate aesthetics, that is not within my purview, the budget, and I would not dare even thinking of allocating money from that budget. That is not one over which I have say. So we'll ask perhaps for that to be looked at. With regard to a regular maintenance, there is regular maintenance. It may not be as regular as you would wish, but certainly it is there. And I think now that the furlough scheme has ceased as far as Norwich North environmental staff, things will start to get back to normal. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
9. Councillor Wright, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. No supplementary, but I'd just like to thank Councillor Packer for his reply and for offering a tantalising glimmer of hope to frustrated park users. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 10, Councillor Ackroyd. Do you have a supplementary question? Councillor Davis has offered her apologies today, so I'm sure you can get a written answer, but if there's a supplementary.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I've already heard from Councillor Davis. She phoned me, so I've had my opportunity to discuss it with her. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Question 11, Councillor Maxwell, do you have a supplementary question?
No supplementary question, but thank you very much for a very concise reply.
Thank you. Question 12, Councillor Susans, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you for your answer, and I'm very pleased how positive the feedback has been, and I have seen firsthand the quality of the homes. How would you summarise the improvement in the company, please?
Right, end of that.
Okay, thank you, Sue, and thank you for the opportunity to just add to the answer that I've already given. I mean, the word I would use to describe the transition of the company is astounding. There's no other word I can use. The team has worked very closely and steadfastly to develop governance processes, ensure a very high quality product, and to secure its place in the market. And that is really now paying off. The current phase is proving to be very successful, as you've seen, and all the information we have is that we can expect that to continue into the future. And the other thing I would say is, on the back of all this, and despite some of the challenges which we are now overcoming, we have delivered much needed housing for the city, which wouldn't otherwise have been there. So I'm very pleased to be able to respond further to you.
Thank you. Question 13, Councillor Mike Stans, do you have a supplementary question?
No supplementary, thank you, Lord Mayor, but I'd like to thank the Cabinet for the answer. Very comprehensive.
Thank you. Question 14, Councillor Giles, do you have a supplementary question?
No supplementary, but thank you to Councillor Jones for standing up for private renters in my community and across the city.
Thank you. Question 15. Councillor Ryan, do you have a supplementary question?
No supplementary question, but it's great to hear this good news about the council.
Thank you. Question 16. Councillor Broshett-Colton, do you have a supplementary question?
No supplementary, Lord Mayor, but just to thank for the reply and look forward to use and getting Ali Gates for Sewell.
Thank you. Question 17. Councillor Matthew Fulton McAllister, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Lord Mayor. I'd like to begin just by thanking Councillor Waters for the comprehensive response. It clearly stands in marked contrast to the actions that have been taken by Chloe Smith's husband. And while she's not responsible for his actions, members of this chamber may be aware that he's condemned the wearing of masks in public. He's called for the ending of social distancing, and that makes her household an incredibly high-risk household, where she will regularly be meeting members of the public in her constituency business. And I'd like to ask Councillor Waters if he'll address this matter with her to identify how she's going to make her household less of a risk as a result of this.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Right, thank you, Councillor Fulton McAllister. The issue you're referring to in your supplementary, of course, got a very significant airing in the local media. To the extent that the editor of the EDP Evening News listed a series of questions that he felt the MP for Norwich North should answer, on the basis that although an individual's views are an individual's views, in the current circumstances of COVID and public health issues, and my answer to your question in part described some of the public health precautions that we are taking as a council. That public health dimension is one that goes beyond saying, not my views, or my husband's entitled to his own views. And other comments were certainly made in that area. That's the truth of the matter. And, with the latest restrictions introduced by the Prime Minister, intending to last for at least 6 months, nobody can be complacent. Everybody's health is important. And what I'm hoping for is that the coverage of this issue a few weeks ago, matter of 2 or 3 weeks, I think, has been sufficient for behaviours to be corrected. But what I will say I will do in answer to your request is I will reserve for myself the right to write a letter to my MP, Chloe Smith, for Norwich North, and to raise any issues should the same kind of public comments and public behaviours arise again. I'm hoping that the response in the local media, the response by members of the public have meant that there's a public safety and public health are uppermost in the minds of the MP and her family, which I'm sure they are.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Waters. Concludes the questions. Move on to item 6, appointment of interim chief finance and section 151 officer. This report can be found in your supplementary agenda pack, which is available on the council's website. I call upon Councillor Kendrick to move item 6.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. First of all, can I pay tribute to Hannah Simpson, our previous finance officer, who did a splendid job. The good news is, however, she's staying with us and she will become the deputy interim finance officer. Now, can I introduce the new finance officer, who will be Annabelle Scholes. Many of you will know Annabelle from the work she has done with us as part of the finance team over the past few months, particularly her work to support the insourcing of services currently provided via a joint venture with Norse. Having been Director of Finance in Bristol and in the London Borough, Annabelle brings a wealth of experience to the role, and I look forward to working with her as our finance officer. And may I wish her the best of luck And I think members will find her an excellent officer to work with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Call upon Councillor Stutely to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd also like to welcome Annabelle and look forward to working with her. And I'd also like to thank Hannah for her work, and I look forward to working with her in the future too. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like group spokespersons, Councillor Bergline.
Thank you. Yeah, I also would like to start by thanking Hannah for her fantastic work she's done in the interim role during a really difficult time. I'm especially grateful to her for being a finance officer that was always surprisingly easy to get a hold of when I had any additional questions. And I'm also glad, as Councillor Kendrick has said, that Hannah will stay on at the council to work alongside the new interim chief finance officer. I'm very happy to endorse the appointment of Annabelle Schultz as the interim finance officer. Based on the meetings I attended with her, I believe Annabelle is a highly competent officer and she's very progressive and a proactive chief finance officer. There you go, I'm giving finance a new branding. So I'm very happy to endorse the appointment.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm very happy to endorse this appointment on an interim basis, and I'm confident that Annabelle is fully able to fulfil the role of Chief Finance Officer and Section 151 Officer. I would also like to thank Hannah Simpson for all her help during her time as our previous 151 officer. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors who'd like to contribute? Both screens. Okay. Councillor Kendrick, would you like to respond? Councillor Kendrick?
Sorry, no, thank you. Sorry, technical troubles there.
Okay. We'll now move to a vote. All those against? Okay. Abstentions? All those in favour? Oh, sorry, yeah, Councillor Kendrick, we haven't got any video of you at the moment. Oh, there we go.
Yep.
Just hiding. Okay.
Yep.
Got you. Okay. Good stuff. Okay, that's resolution has been carried. Thank you. Item 7. Treasury Management Full Year Review 2019 to 20. I call upon Councillor Kendrick to move item 7.
I'll be relatively brief on this because I do appreciate we've already spent an hour with this council meeting. But this paper is really for information for members. It specifies our financial approach and our management of our resources. Can I just go through some of the sections? Paragraph 7 to 10 looks at our capital activities during the year. 11 to 17 looks at the impact of those activities upon our underlying indebtedness. Paragraphs 16 to 22 deal with the prudent treasury indicators. And then it goes on to deal with, between paragraph 23 and 27, of the overall treasury position. Our borrowing strategy and detailed debt activity is detailed in paragraph 28 to 39, and our investment strategy and detailed investment activity can be found in paragraph 40 to 46. I think at the end of the day, I would simply state that this council is using its financial resources in these very troubled times. We all, of course, know how dramatic the reduction has been in government revenue support grant for this local authority, amongst others. We have managed our resources in a very sensible and sound manner. And that has meant we haven't had to see the kind of levels of cuts that we have seen in other authorities, including Norfolk County Council. If members have any issues dealing with this paper, I'm sure if they raise that with the Finance Department, they will be very happy to actually explain any particular point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. I call upon Councillor Stoutley to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Formally seconded and reserve the right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite group spokespersons now. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yeah, okay. So treasury management is essentially the management of the council's cash flow, what the associated risks are and how we minimise them. We are asked to note this report, which sets out the council's financial activity and performance for the 1920 cycle. The report shows us that there was a borrowing need of £42 million to finance the capital programme. After adjustments for the NRL loan repayments, the capital financing requirement for the year was £38.5 million. In order to ensure that borrowing levels are prudent over the medium term and only for capital purpose, the council should ensure that its gross external borrowing does not exceed the total of the capital financing requirement in the preceding year, plus the estimate of any additional capital financing requirement for the current and next 2 financial years. The overall amount of council borrowing now stands at £220 million. This may not seem much of an issue as we find ourselves significantly below the authorised limit of £373 million, but it's worth noting that in the Treasury Management Strategy, gross debt is forecast to grow to £350 million by the end of the 23-24 cycle. That's an additional £100 million of debt the council will take on over the next 4 years and precariously close to the upper limit. We are all aware that the council is under tremendous financial pressure, but while we struggle to generate income and choose to saddle the city with intergenerational debt that fails to bring co-benefits to its citizens and undermines the council's environmental strategy, Greens question if this is the right course of action. Although commercial property investments are producing a welcome return, that return is not without creating a significant risk to the council. Principal risks associated with commercial property investment include the illiquidity of commercial property, the risk that the future value of the property will be less than the amount of loan repayment required upon disposal, investor confidence, interest rate changes, void rental periods, and the lack of availability of debt finance. The commercial property investment strategy states that there is a liquidity risk of holding property and should not be understated, especially in an economic downturn. I welcome that this strategy will be reviewed soon, especially in light of the accelerated economic problems this country's economy faces due to the coronavirus pandemic. Last year, the council spent £40 million on commercial property, mainly out of area, bringing no direct benefit to the city. The types of investments chosen are sadly going in the opposite direction to a low carbon economy. It may be levelled at Green councillors to suggest alternative property investments, ones that do provide community and environmental benefits. And I'd point you towards Warrington, whose commercial investment strategy includes investments in local regeneration and renewable energy. In fact, Warrington's Treasury Management Strategy also shows that they have invested in green energy bonds. We have excellent officers equipped with the professional skills to find these low carbon alternative investments, ones which bring benefits directly to the citizens of Norwich. It only requires the right forward thinking leadership to develop the right strategies and subsequently set the criteria within its policy framework. The truth is that the administration has rushed through the purchasing of properties to beat the closing of the loophole in borrowing to generate yield, in an attempt to avoid making unpopular cuts to services. I fear that the quick buck the administration has grasped will become a costly millstone around the city's neck in the years to come. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government and CIPFA Code stress the importance and long-held good practice of placing security and liquidity above yield. However, the council's policy in the case of the commercial property investment is to prioritise the security of the investment followed by yield and then liquidity. Greens are doubtful that placing yield above liquidity is the right way to go and would like to see yield to not be defined in terms of strict economic income, but would like to see wider community co-benefits to sit on a par with this investment parameter. Community co-benefits will often create savings in the future or help to increase other asset values the council holds in its portfolio, not to mention better lives for the residents of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I don't have a huge amount to add in noting this report, but there were just a few items that stood out to me. The first one was on paragraph 9 on page 25, which notes a reduction in the balance owed by Norwich Regeneration Limited. The relationship between the council's finances and those of NRL are something that we continue to maintain a watching brief over. Work undertaken to finance borrowing via internal means rather than external loans reported in para 22 on page 28 is welcome news, as the council has been able to reduce interest charges by continuing to adopt this approach. And the strategy of maintaining an overall under-borrowed position reported in para 28 recognises that investment returns are low, so that it's safer and better value to use cash rather than loan debt as a temporary measure. Those were the three key things that leapt out of that report at me, but we're happy to endorse this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors who indicate want to contribute to this? Yay, nay? Okay. Councillor Kendrick, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I have to completely refute the allegations made by Councillor Price as to our commercial property strategy. It has been a great success and has brought in considerable revenues to this council, which has helped protect the vital frontline services to our community. Once again, of course, the Green Party go on this issue, but they never tell us what services they would cut instead without the monies that we've received from our commercial properties investments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kendrick. We'll now move to the vote. All those against? Okay, abstentions? All those in favour? Okay, thank you. The resolution has been carried. We'll move on to item 8, future housing commissioning. I call upon Councillor Harris to move item 8.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The purpose of this report is quite straightforward: to consider an adjustment to the 2020-21 HRA capital programme to increase the budget allocation to support the development of new council housing. This council has a proud history of building council housing. Indeed, in the 1950s, there was a report to council saying that we needed to be careful that we did not build too many houses. Oh, how things have changed. There is a housing crisis across the country. We have a Tory government who places no importance on building social housing, who is committed to first homes and has done nothing to remove the bureaucracy surrounding a retained right to buy receipts. It must be admitted that this Tory government has removed the HRA borrowing cap, something which this council lobbied hard on. But it must be remembered that any housing scheme must be affordable within the overall borrowing of the council. There is no recognition that the housing need will vary from local authority to local authority, and in Norwich, with over 4,000 people on the waiting list, the need is most certainly for social housing. Also, let us not forget that each year we lose approximately 140 properties under the right to buy. We are fighting an uphill battle. As a council, we are committed to building high quality homes and communities, and we have a wealth of experience from the renovation project at Bullard Road and our most recent builds at Hansard Close, Rain Park, and not forgetting the award-winning Goldsmith Street. We know the importance of high environmental standards, whilst at the same time combating fuel poverty and furniture poverty for our tenants. We also know that house building will be absolutely vital in stimulating the local economy in these challenging times. We are at a point when we're on the starting line to build new homes in Mile Cross Ward. The site of the former Mile Cross depot is an iconic site, a site known to residents across the city. The celebrations for 100 years of council housing have been sadly curtailed due to COVID-19. But it was in Mile Cross where the first major housing estate for this council was built in 1920. I can think of no better way to celebrate this centenary event than by our commitment to start the build process for 150 to 200 good quality homes in this very same ward. This will be a challenging site because of its former use, but this is the first of a pipeline of sites across the city to develop homes and communities. So I ask the full council to approve the 3 recommendations as set out on page 41. You probably don't need me to read those out to you. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Huntley, second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm very happy to second this and support this council's commitment to providing new council housing. Representing the residents of Mile Cross, the plan to support development of the Mile Cross depot site is especially welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite the group spokespersons. Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm pleased to see that we're being asked to agree adjustments to the HRA capital programme to support the development of new council housing. Good news indeed. The call for funds is appropriate and extending the repayments is logical now we are building good quality properties that will last way beyond even 60 years. I just wish that the build quality had been higher for council properties built in the 60s, which are now costing us dearly in maintenance. The £180,000 to support design technical studies for the Mile Cross site will enable all councillors to make an informed judgment, hopefully by next year, as to what is the best proposal for that site. Not only layout, house sizes, types and designs, but most importantly, the level of environmental build quality. My motion in January, agreed by the council, was for all new housing to be built to the highest environmental standards, the Goldsmith Street development being the benchmark to follow. However, the Labour administration did add caveats that are financially inappropriate to cite. I now see there's a new phrase that's crept in, enhanced environmental standards. And that's come in this document and others. It does concern me that the highest environmental standards may not be the goal now. I sincerely hope the administration has not already set its sights on reducing the highest standards levels even before the design technical studies and the various options have been presented to us. The appropriate to site caveat should not affect such a large-scale development, as there will be many options for best orientations. The financially caveat should also not be an issue, considering the Goldsmith development looks likely to come in around 5 to 8% above standard build costs. Any extra build costs on this development will be compensated for by the proposed 5% rental premium over the 60-year repayment of the development costs. Taking actual financial costs out of the equation, the benefits for the environment are priceless. I am happy to agree these adjustments.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. There is no debate that much needed affordable council housing is a good thing, and we continue to fully support the aims of the council in delivering good quality housing. The ambition to generate up to 200 homes at the former depot site in Mile Cross is hugely welcomed, with the additional rent for homes that meet the enhanced environmental standards justified, given the evidence that it will lead to reduction in energy costs for tenants and provides a combined approach to meet the overall cost of the development. The modelling demonstrates that schemes are affordable, and as the report sets out, extending the business plan over 60 years provides more flexibility when considering what can be done in terms of upgrades versus new builds. Very happy to endorse this report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors who have indicated who'd like to contribute? Councillor Stoutley.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, much attention has been given to other high-profile development sites in the city, but for me, this is the most important one we have, mainly because it will deliver social housing, more social housing than any other site, and importantly, from the outset, I look forward to seeing the plans as they come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Okay. Councillor Harris, would you like to respond?
Well, I think we have overall support from from the councillors. I'm really excited by the prospect of us actually getting started on this site, because it is an important site, and you know the possibility of providing so many social housing or homes is just absolutely, you know, breathtaking. So Councillor Neil has mentioned that, you know, we aren't always aiming perhaps high enough for him with the enhanced environmental standards. But I have to point out we've learned an awful lot from building passive houses, and one can use quite a lot of the principles without actually having the stamp on them. So we need to think further than just the 3 projects that we've already talked about recently. So, and we have to be mindful that we've got to balance the cost and borrowing within the council to get the very best environmental standards that we are able to afford, and to deliver fuel savings for our tenants. So I think this is a very, very positive first step. And like Councillor Stuteley, I look forward to seeing the houses starting to be built.
Thank you. We'll now move to the vote. All those against? Abstentions? Okay, all those in favour? Resolution has been carried. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 9, committee meetings 2020 to 2021. Call upon Councillor Kendrick to move item 9.
I think this is fairly self-explanatory. It obviously just states the dates of future committee meetings for this council to approve. So I'd probably move it.
Thank you. I call upon Councillor Giles to second the item.
Formally seconded, Lord Mayor, reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Let's invite the group spokespersons. Councillor Bergerlein.
Yes, if you may, I would just like to make 3 very, very brief points. I really hope that going forward, if and when we are able to meet in person again, that we include 2 elements from this journey of virtual meetings that we've been on. First of all, a live recording of the meetings that members of the public can watch at home on YouTube. I hope we can take that forward, even if we come together in the chamber again. Then secondly, an option to join the meetings virtually to open up democracy to groups of people, such as, for example, carers or people with certain disabilities who may find it difficult to attend meetings in person. I think if Parliament can do it, then we can do it. And I would also just like to again urge the council to revert to the normal meeting time of 7:30 for full council meeting. The earlier meeting start of 6 o'clock that we currently have makes it really difficult for many of us who have returned back to work. We will require enough time before the meeting to be able to read through all the answers to questions and to deal with any last minute issues in relation to the meeting. So it would be really much appreciated if the time could be changed back to a later time, even though we're still holding virtual meetings in a recognition that some professions have returned to normal working patterns, or in fact have never stopped them in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I wasn't going to say anything in particular on this, but I'd like to pick up the points that Councillor Bergerlein has just made. Whilst I fully endorse the opening up the meetings to other groups and maintaining sort of hybrid nature of perhaps some virtual, some in person, on the issue of the meeting time, particularly the start time for this meeting, I think there is another aspect that we have to take into consideration, and that is those officer colleagues from the council who have done a day's work and are here to support us. So if we start at 7:30 and then we have our 2 hours and then we suspend standing orders so that we can continue discussing our motions that we're then all going to subsequently agree on anyway, that is, I think, can be an unfair imposition on those officers. So I think there is a balance to be adopted here. 6 o'clock is probably too early, 7:30 is probably too late. So if we can come to a compromise somewhere in the middle, then that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Any other councillors who wish to contribute? Councillor Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. Just to pick up on what Councillor James Wright said about the timing of the main meeting, I believe it should be back to where it was. And the fact that officers are employed to attend those doesn't mean to say that they're going to do a full day's work beforehand. Ours can be adjusted, it's quite easy. But you've got parents, families, all trying to fit everything in. And either you have meetings in the normal daytime hours or in the evening. This half and half is really causing issues for many people.
Thank you. Councillor Stannard.
Yeah, I'm mindful of the time and the fact we're probably going to end up suspending standing orders tonight, the way things are going. And just to say, we don't have to debate this now. We can actually deal with the issue of the start time as and when we start having face-to-face meetings again. So I suggest we move on and get on with agreeing this in principle, and then we'll come back later on to deal with the start times and those issues.
Thank you. Anyone else? No. Okay, Councillor Kendrick, would you like to?
Yes.
Oh, right. Oh, right. Sorry, didn't see it. Apologies, Councillor Erin Fulton McAllister.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. What I wanted to say was partially what Councillor Neil had said, that that while we appreciate the officers being here later for later meetings, as a good employer, I would be hoping that we were being flexible with the hours that they were working, and I would hope there is no expectation that they would have to have done a full day in advance of that. My main point that I wanted to raise was that not just when we go back to face-to-face meetings, but right now, a lot of us are back at work, as Councillor Bogerline has highlighted, and the 6 o'clock start time is a problem right now during virtual meetings as well. I think that we really need to be looking to take it back to its normal time for virtual meetings as well, because otherwise we are continuing to be exclusionary and to exclude parents, young people, working people from democracy, and that is unacceptable. We passed a motion last year about encouraging parents to stand for council by expanding the range of parental leave, etc. Councillors were supportive of that, but as I said in my speech at the time, that was only the first step, and it is things like this that make all the difference for these sorts of issues. We cannot afford to take this step back. I don't have children. I did foster until not too long ago. I know that up until 7:30 at that point was one of the busiest times, and that I could not afford to lose from 6 o'clock till 7:30 with children. I know that in my current work role, I cannot afford to lose that time, and that I am really struggling to keep up at the moment because of this earlier time. So I would urge us to go back to 7:30 now.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Erin Fulton McAllister. Are there any other councillors? Councillor Mike Sands.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to echo some of the sentiments, because the 6 o'clock start is very awkward. It ends up with councillors, even those who don't have commitments with children, etc., eating rubbish for their evening meal, or having their evening meal exceedingly late in the evening. And then, of course, you've got councillors who are still putting a day's work and need time to get home from work, get themselves settled, organise an evening meal, and then join council either virtually online or coming into City Hall. So, you know, there are other things to be considered as well. And of course, if you're a parent with children, wow, you know, it's a whole new different ball game.
Thank you. That's it. Anyone else wants anything to say? No. Okay. Councillor Kendrick, would you like to respond?
I think simply to say that I think perhaps there should be a consultation amongst all councillors. This is something I'll look into to ask them when most members feel that the start time should be. I mean, there's obviously a variety of opinions, but surely we can actually just ask councillors for their opinions.
Okay. Thank you. We'll now move to the vote. All those against? No. Abstentions? No. All those in favour? Yep. Okay, that's the resolution's been carried. Thank you. Right, motion 10A, the private rented sector. Please bear with us while officers remove members from the meeting who have declared a pecuniary interest and have not requested a dispensation. Okay, thank you. I received a request to take the vote on this item in two parts. The third part of resolution 2C, which reads...
Sorry, Lord Mayor, I'm still on live. I thought I should be out of the...
Oh, right, sorry.
Yeah, me too.
Sorry. Just pause a minute, please. Yeah. Could you declare an interest in this? Could you do that now, Councillor Neil?
Yeah, I did declare a pecuniary interest for 10B. Yep.
I also have a pecuniary interest in number 10A that I declared earlier.
And do you have a dispensation?
No.
No. Yeah. Councillor Joseph, do you have a dispensation?
No, I don't.
No. Councillor Giles.
Lord Mayor, just for clarity, I was granted a dispensation to stay in the meeting. Do I have dispensation to vote, or?
Yeah.
No.
Been granted dispensation. Okay, well, I'm told we're good to go. Excellent. I did get through that one. I received a request to take the vote in two parts. Did you hear that bit? Do you want me to do it again? The third part of resolution 2C, which reads cap rents at the local housing allowance rate, will be taken in a separate vote. The amendment to motion 10A has been received from Councillor Osborne, which has been circulated and is available on the council's website. Councillor Jones has indicated that she is willing to accept the amendment. Therefore, if no member objects to it, it will become part of the substantive motion. Okay. No objections? There's no one's objected. That's agreed. I call upon Councillor Jones to move motion 10A as amended.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. When I submitted this motion, I was still clinging on to the vague hope that the government would have learnt from recent debacles and stepped in to give true protections to private renters, both in relating to COVID, but more broadly as reforms are desperately needed. Sadly, but unsurprisingly, they have allowed this opportunity to pass by and abandoned thousands who rent in the private sector. Without meaningful action to mitigate the impact of COVID on private renters, we will be facing an exponential rise in homelessness just as winter approaches. Whilst there are now some small protections for those who get served with a notice post 29th of August, this is only a stay and more worryingly ignores the estimated 55,000 private renters who'd been served with notices prior to this. And it doesn't end there. The end of furlough is almost upon us in a matter of weeks. With predicted redundancies potentially running into hundreds of thousands, there across the country will be an even greater wave of people facing that agonising choice as they discover that the local housing allowance has a significant shortfall compared to their private rents, and they are left with the really horrendous choice between bare essentials of food, rent, heating as winter closes in. Robert Jenrick's promise that no one would lose their homes as a consequence of COVID-19 rings rather hollow now. But with as with A-levels and so many other issues recently, there's still opportunity to salvage something and for this Tory government to do the right thing. It isn't too late. All or any of the actions in this motion calls for could offer real relief and long-term improvements for our private renters. As a council, our commitment to private renters is as strong as ever and has been at the forefront of our concerns throughout the pandemic. It's both in terms of those who are faced with homelessness, but also, just as importantly, those who live in substandard and often unsafe conditions. We have an amazing home options team who support private renters and an equally amazing private sector housing team who are relentless in their pursuit to drive up standards across the private rented sector. And nowhere is that commitment better demonstrated than with St Faith's Lane, where tenants are faced with no heating, leaking sewage, limited hot water and dodgy electrics, just to name but a few hazards. Against a landlord with a less than spotless record across the country, we didn't back down and we used every power at our disposal and ultimately prohibited the property, supporting more than 20 families to find alternative safe housing and refusing to back down in pursuit of the most basic safety standards. And we fought this all the way to the Royal Courts of Justice, who upheld our concerns, and we continue to take on that landlord. This is how seriously your city council takes that responsibility to its citizens. We are clear there is no place in our city for rogue landlords, such as the former owner of St Faith's Lane Apartments, or any other who takes such a casual approach to the safety of our citizens. Whilst we have an expanded HMO licensing system now, our responsibility cannot end there, and we must look to improving standards across the private rented sector, from housing multiple occupancy and converted offices to 2-bedroom terraced houses. All these tenants have an equal right to safe and secure homes. Lord Mayor, imagine if we could license all private rented properties in the same way as HMOs. This would be an unparalleled opportunity and tool to drive up standards across the sector. In addition, that licence could provide some of the much needed resources to achieve this improvement, and we wouldn't be reliant on the ever diminishing resources that central government provide. Whilst we do actually have an ability to introduce private sector housing licensing, that introduction sadly is at the whim of the Secretary of State. Based on their refusal elsewhere in the country to continue schemes that have delivered fantastic transformation to private housing stock, there seems little appetite for extended licensing from the Tories. So with this motion, whilst I'm calling for action from the government, Lord Mayor, given their record and their response across the pandemic, I sadly have little faith of any meaningful protections being delivered on a national level. But still, I call for those. But be assured that our resolve as a City Council and Labour administration is undiminished, and I can restate our commitment to using all available powers and resources to support those in the private rented sector, particularly those left vulnerable by COVID-19. And I was really proud that we laid that out initially back pre-COVID in a report that went to Cabinet, setting out our commitment to a private renters charter, and that's something I look forward to building on. So colleagues, I ask you to show your support and solidarity to the more than 22% of our residents, the thousands we represent who live precariously in the private rented sector, and support this motion as we head into the second wave, potentially, of COVID. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Huntley, might you second the item?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I would. Providing support and security for tenants is an important commitment. Given the uncertainty caused by the current circumstances and the government's handling of this, the economic situation is likely to be precarious for some time. Safeguarding tenants from evictions, along with the other measures here, will be as timely as they are imperative. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This motion addresses an emergency in housing and aims to both reduce poor conditions and evictions. As such, the principles behind it would have our full support, and I want to thank Councillors Jones and Councillor Davis in her absence for bringing it. The lack of affordable, decent rented homes and the lack of renters' rights particularly affects women. It affects single parents, disabled people, young people, and many others who may be vulnerable. Not all landlords are bad, though. I know from my personal experience of renting that I've rented 9 different properties in a couple of years. I know that, and I know from talking to private renters in my ward, that a lot of landlords are caring people who provide vital access to housing for those who can't afford or who don't want to buy. Yet, eviction laws in this country disproportionately favour landlords over tenants, leading to some awful abuses of power and contributing to homelessness. If you compare our laws to those of other countries like Germany, you see how a decent housing system in which renting is a secure and long-term choice could work. The government's end in the eviction ban in this country could leave people homeless at a desperately difficult, not to say life-threatening time. I therefore welcome this motion's call for ending evictions and abolishing Section 21 notices. Stepping back a bit, we have to look at whether this motion would actually achieve what it sets out to achieve. A blanket cap of rents at the local housing allowance rates now could see a rush for landlords to sell their properties. That may push down house prices in the short term, but could lead to more housing ending up in the lead to more housing ending up in the hands of profit-seeking developers. Would there be enough rental houses then, especially for young people or for others who may want to rent? So we need a more systemic solution. In London, Green Party campaigners, including the Green Party Assembly member Sian Berry, have called for a rent commission to cap rents and then lower them in a sustainable way to ensure that the poorest and the most vulnerable have access to decent housing always, without simply seeing land bought up by developers. And to be clear, Green Party councillors support the principles of rent caps. But there's a risk that the way that this is proposed in this motion could have counterproductive knock-on effects. And I therefore expect that some councillors will abstain from voting for this particular part of the motion. Personally, as an individual, I will be voting for it, as I support the principle of it. More generally, there are further policies that we need to tackle the underlying causes of unfair rents. Rent controls are one way, but we need a land value tax that would tackle the hoarding of land and the disproportionate prices. At the same time, of course, we need to be providing more social, council and affordable housing, which looks back to something that was discussed earlier, and we need to be supporting councils to achieve that. So we need government to be properly funding councils to do that. Getting decent housing also requires investment as well as changes to the law. We need a massive programme of retrofitting that will improve living standards and energy efficiency at the same time. There needs to be investment in training so that we have people who can carry out that work. And landlords, especially individual non-corporate landlords, need to be able to afford to invest in well-insulated homes, which isn't always cheap. And I'll just stress again that Green Party councillors have called on this administration, the Labour administration, to drive forward retrofitting, including through making that a key part of the COVID recovery plan. And I hope that the council will work proactively with partners to really drive that forward. So in conclusion, we're always pleased to see motions like this being brought to council to aim to improve housing in Norwich. We hope that we can continue to work together to improve standards and challenge the government to do their part. I'd also add that I hope that this motion will feed into the work that the Scrutiny Committee will be doing in November on homelessness, which is a very important topic at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne. Councillor Ackroyd.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Recent figures show that a fifth of people across England now live in privately rented accommodation. In 1996, it was half that amount, but yet our private renting model is based on laws introduced in the late 1980s. Instead of being primarily a temporary stop for young adults who used to buy after a few years renting, private rentals are also now homes for families with dependent children, older renters, and those near to pension age, people with disabilities and vulnerable people in low-income households, often with complex needs. Tenants often have very little bargaining power, or they do have very little bargaining power within the private rented sector, sometimes only showing their tenancy agreement after putting down money, and almost 1 in 3 renters would not feel confident negotiating terms and conditions. We need longer tenancies to be available as a default option for those who want them. It's a cliched line, but on the continent, families pass on tenancies from one generation to another. Enabling longer tenancies should also allow us to recast renters as long-term residents in their communities, allowing them to have the opportunity to be more involved with their neighbours and neighbourhoods. Renters have been protected for the most part from eviction during the pandemic by the ban announced in March, and then extended after pressure by Labour and Lib Dem MPs, amongst others. This motion comes, of course, the day after existing protections came to an end, meaning that tens of thousands of private renters could be at risk of losing their homes. According to Shelter, 322,000 private renters have fallen into arrears since the public health crisis began, while 174,000 were threatened with eviction by landlords or letting agents. Citizens' Advice have found that an estimated 4 million have fallen behind on rent, council tax, or telecoms bill, for example. The Mayor of London has written to the Secretary of State for Housing asking to be given powers to freeze rents for both new and existing private sector tenants for 2 years, although landlords can still, of course, reduce rents during the period. The 2-year freeze to be extended if the economic outlook does not improve during this period. Crucially, the government needs to speed up plans to scrap Section 21 no-fault evictions. The Housing Minister recently indicated that it could be 2021 before the bill is introduced. For a small piece of legislation, Section 21 has a big impact. It's the cause of many evictions, including so-called revenge eviction, where landlords quite legally turf out tenants they no longer want with only 2 months' notice, sometimes because their tenants have complained about something, such as faulty electrics or leaking walls. Section 21 makes many private renters second-class citizens, forced to endure circumstances that compromise their health or risk their safety because they're poor or low-waged or can't get a foot on the property ladder. It threatens young and old, single and families, and as the size of the private renting population grows, it's reaching into more of our communities. Time for it to go. We're very happy to support this important motion, but will abstain on the rent capping section, as following a briefing from a housing policy specialist working in the third sector, we have some major concerns. Amongst other things, it potentially deepens the rent crisis for those living just outside the cap, as it could push those prices up. It could also lead to poor quality stock, already an issue, as landlords have less financial incentive to make improvements. And it could also lead to the creation of lower quality HMOs as landlords seek to maximise rent potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ackroyd. Any other councillors who've indicated like to contribute? Councillor Mike Sands.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I certainly endorse this motion. Tory national policy on housing really is the problem. It's a problem for all of us in every authority across the country. I would also like to highlight the situation of many thousands who rent a room in an HMO and who perhaps don't enjoy any form of secure tenancy. Rent capping or rent control is perhaps a long-term answer to be considered. Who can forget the cast of Friends in a spacious New York apartment? Yes, it is fiction, but in this fiction, they could only afford that spacious apartment due to rent controls in New York. So rent capping and rent controls may be a real solution to be considered not only by Norwich, but by other authorities across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mike Sands. Councillor Stewley.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Without targeted central government support, such as an extension of the furlough scheme for those industries most affected by the coronavirus pandemic, there will be a likely surge in unemployment in the city and the pressures upon tenants that is associated with that. People working in the hospitality sector, pubs and restaurants, for example, are particularly vulnerable, and many of these staff are on low incomes in private rented housing. It's a worry, and this is a very timely motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors? No. Okay. Councillor Jones, would you like to respond? Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Councillor Maguire, waving vigorously. Okay.
Waving, not drowning, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I'd just like to make a comment on this. Obviously, I'm totally in support of the motion. And of course, historically, this country controlled its rents. And it was only under Thatcher in the 80s when controlled and regulated rents were removed. We've got a long tradition. Interestingly enough, it was a Conservative government back in 1957 that maintained the controlled and regulated rents in the 57 Housing Act very strongly, and it remained there. So this is a recent problem by, quite frankly, a greedy government that wished to support a particular group of people. And we have a much longer and fine tradition in this country. And what this motion is asking for is let's go back to that tradition. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Maguire. Any others? No? Okay. Now we'll go to Councillor Jones. Would you like to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And yes, I'd like to just highlight we do have some very good landlords in the city. We have some that are appalling, and we have some in the middle who are looking to improve and work with us. Going to the issue of rent caps, I suppose in the past I've always brought stuff to council that's stuff where I feel we can have a direct impact as a council, and that's been focusing on improving and driving up standards. But I think it's the real grim reality that, and something I see both in my day job and as a councillor, of people who are faced with very, very high private rents in this city when you compare them to what they will receive as the local housing allowance, and what is going to potentially be an enormous surge in unemployment. And people who are going to, the reality is they're going to be our residents relying on UC. And whilst I love all sorts of other solutions, the reality is those people are going to have to make over winter that hard choice. Do I heat my home, feed myself or my family, or pay the extra rent? Because the local housing allowance is the local housing allowance. And when I look at what my neighbours pay in rent compared to what I pay as a mortgage, and I'm lucky to be in that position, it is absolutely enormous, the difference. And that's the reality across far too much of our city. And yes, there are landlords who have invested in their properties over the years really positively, but I have also lived in properties where I have paid a large amount of money and landlords have not fed that back in. So I don't think we can say that they have all had a tough time for many years. I think there are a number who have made a large amount of money from people who have had, as a result of this Tory government and a previous right to buy policy, had to resort to the private rented sector when maybe historically they'd have used social housing. So we're in an unprecedented time of COVID. So I think it's about talking about unprecedented solutions, or what else is on the table. It's open for everyone to be creative, have ideas. We've got a problem that needs to be fixed. Let's have practical solutions, please. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Jones. We'll now move to the vote. The first vote will be on all resolutions, excluding the third part of Resolution 2C. Is everyone clear on that one? Yep. Okay, excluding Resolution 2C, all those against? No. Okay, abstentions? Okay. Those in favour? Okay. Those resolutions have been carried. We'll now move to the second part of the vote. This vote is on the third part of Resolution 2C, which reads, cap rents at the local housing allowance rate. All those against? No. Okay. Abstentions? Okay. Got that? And all those in favour? Okay, that resolution's been carried. We'll now readmit members who had declared an interest in this item before moving on to the next item. And it is actually 8 o'clock as well. Oh, we start at 6:10. Yeah, okay. Who's clock watching? No one. Okay. Okay, right. Motion 10B, action on fly tipping. An amendment to motion 10B, sorry, wait a minute. Oh. Councillor Maguire, do you?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I would like to propose a procedural motion under Part 52E of Appendix 1 of the Council's Constitution to suspend procedure Rules 60 and 65 in relation to this item, i.e. Agenda Item 10B only, in order to allow an amendment to be added to the motion. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. The seconder? Councillor Giles. Okay, can we proceed on that then? Yep. An amendment, sorry, an amendment to motion 10B has been received from Councillors Maguire, which has been circulated. Councillor Schmierer has indicated that he is willing to accept the amendment. As the content of the amendment is not allowable under the Council's Constitution, as it introduces a new proposal to the motion, I understand that Councillor Maguire will propose and Councillor Jones will second the procedural motion to allow the amendment to be included in the motion, which is what you've done, Maguire. Very good. Councillor Jones, would you like to second the procedural motion? Very good. Nodding satisfies it. We'll now move to vote on the procedural motion to suspend standing orders to allow the amendment to be included in the motion. Please note that there will be another vote at the end of the item on the motion in its entirety. All those against? Nope. Okay. Abstentions? You got that? Yep. All those in favour? Councillor Kendrick, your videos seem to have. He has done. We can do. Councillor Kendrick. No. Yeah. Motion, resolution is carried. The procedural motion has been carried. If no other members object, the amendment will become part of the substantive motion. I call upon Councillor Schmierer to move motion 10B as amended.
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you very much to my colleagues who put forward their amendments to this motion, the amendments of which I'm very happy to include, as it helps improve, I think, and this idea of developing a new approach to the problem of fly tipping, a problem that I am sure many of us in this chamber and indeed many of the residents of our city are too aware of, unfortunately. Indeed, I know I am not the only councillor, both in this council, but across the UK, who has raised the matter of fly tipping, a problem that has grown in magnitude. And on a personal level, I've grown increasingly exasperated that the issue seems to be getting worse rather than better. Indeed, a cursory glance around the communal bins in the city centre in particular highlights part of this problem, i.e. that residents are sadly either ignorant of the laws or unable to adhere to them for potentially a variety of reasons when it comes to disposing of items such as sofas, televisions, fridges, etc. Indeed, as well, a cursory glance along the roads across the beautiful Norfolk countrysides highlights another part of the problem, i.e. that individuals are willing to take other people's rubbish and simply dump it on roadsides or farmland across our county. In either case, this problem is not a new one, but the recent lockdown, and in particular the closure of the dumps in the city, and the upsurge at the same time with the lockdown of individual gardening and DIY projects, both of which I must say have to be commended as some of the good aspects to come out of the current crisis, but have led to a noticeable increase in fly tipping, unfortunately. And the figures bear out the scale of the problem. Reports of fly tipping nationally increased by 66% between 2014 and 2019. With fly tipping steadily on the increase, the past 5 years have forced individual councils, some of which have had to spend over £10 million each to fight the problem. And the average local authority has paid out a staggering £250,000 roughly in 2019, clearing up litter left by thoughtless fly tippers. With over 400 local authorities across the UK, it means that fly tipping is costing British councils and therefore British taxpayers hundreds of millions of pounds each year. As well as being costly, it is also unsightly, blighting the countryside and posing a health hazard to humans as well as to animals, be they farm animals or other wildlife. Sadly, Norwich has not been spared from this problem. For example, more than 1,700 mattresses were dumped in Norwich over the last 2 years, the fourth highest of any city in the United Kingdom. And this problem isn't going to go away, even if we return to some kind of semblance of normality. Part of the problem is undeniably the throwaway culture we have as a society become accustomed to. Of course, I would love it if we were at a stage where we don't have any waste, where products can be recycled, reused, repaired, refurbished, etc., and where not the companies that produce them dispose of them. Indeed, I would like us to be at such a place whereby laws are passed that mean that the cost of the entire life cycle of a product is included in its price, not just the cost of manufacture. But we are not there yet. Sadly, Norwich City Council, as a result, finds itself at the front line of a problem, and this current situation needs to be re-examined and a new approach required to deal with the problem. And this is exactly what this motion seeks to achieve. Other councils across the UK are also investigating ways to make it easier for people to dispose of their rubbish legally. Perhaps one of the most radical departures from current policy that is suggested in this motion are the introduction of local fly tipping amnesties, community skips, as well as curbside collections. Anything, in other words, that make it easier for residents to get rid of their rubbish legally should be considered and trialed out. So this is where this motion really tries to help residents. It looks at a problem, it suggests some potential solutions. We have got talented and dedicated officers who I know would relish this opportunity to look at this problem anew and come up with solutions. I look forward to their potential ideas going forward, and I hope we can all agree to support this motion and together can deal with a problem that I know affects all of us in this council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Schmier. Councillor Price, you'd like to second the item?
Yes, I'll second the item and speak now, Lord Mayor. Thank you. Just to start off with the suspending of the standing orders there to introduce a new idea, I'd like it to be quite clear that I abstained to that. I do welcome the support from the other party here in the motion, but I would request that you refrain from inserting new ideas and just to support wholeheartedly the motion as it stands next time, as this is very dangerous territory for our democracy. What I will say about the issue is that rural fly tipping in Norfolk is well documented, and people across the county are aware of road traders and the fees which are now charged at recycling centres, both of which may well lead to more fly tipping than in the past. However, I'd like to talk about some of the less obvious causes of fly tipping and how fly tipping is related to poverty. Imagine living in the city centre flat without access to a car. What do you do with any waste item that's too big to fit in the communal bin? The council will collect a bulky item for £24. That's a lot of money to get rid of something when you're on a low income. Not knowing what you should or shouldn't do with your rubbish is also an issue. Many people are under the impression that putting rubbish next to a communal bin is not fly tipping and that will be collected when the bins are emptied. It's not fair to penalise people for not having cars. For a start, that's unfair to people who can't afford them. And secondly, we don't want to encourage car ownership in the city, as we're all well aware of the devastating effects driving can have on air pollution and residents' health. The city needs to find new ways for people to dispose of their rubbish, and these solutions need to be fair. Community skips would be one good way of enabling people to throw away bulky items in a socially responsible way. I'm sure that if such a scheme were implemented, it would pay for itself fairly quickly. Working with the Norwich Car Club to make larger vehicles available to people who would then be able to transport their own waste to the recycling centre is another. Many people don't want to fly tip or leave rubbish lying around, but have little practical choice. Making it possible for them to deal with their own rubbish in appropriate ways would make it easier to then focus on people who would deliberately fly tipping and use enforcement measures to stop that part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. I'd just like to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I'm happy to support the amended version of this motion. I welcome the thrust of the motion, its wish to save the people of Norwich on matters that, by definition, we all find undesirable and wish to dispose of in the most efficient and sanitary manner. I welcome its seeking of a solution to a problem that seems to be growing in the public consciousness, i.e. fly tipping. But of course, while there is more concern with fly tipping, data for the city of Norwich points to a downward trend over the last 4 years. That aside, it's good to look at the ideas behind it. Lord Mayor, the Council's current corporate policy has at heart 3 priorities: great neighbourhoods, housing and environment, an inclusive economy, and people living well. And the Labour administration applies these to all of its actions, including waste management. As the party which actually protects and improves the environment, it was therefore essential that we inserted an environmental impact assessment into the idea of this motion. Years ago, we did have community skips. They were indeed quite popular, as they were open to all and as such received all. This included bulk waste, recyclable waste, trade waste. No doubt they receive toxic waste. In fact, I believe that the one Norwich poisoning death in this country was due to a poisoning because of the being discarded in a skip. But as such a cocktail, any sorting becomes impossible. And so the content of every community skip ended up as landfill. This, along with attendant costs, rang alarm bells, and the council were compelled to stop the service in 2007 due to the environmental impact. It's interesting that the Norwich Green Party did not consider the environment in the original motion. At national level, their party policies are quite clear on landfill. Policies NR 100 to NR 416 tell us the Green Party do not find landfill to be a desirable form of disposal. For example, NR 16.1 puts landfill at the bottom of their disposal hierarchy, and then only if it is inert. NR 416.4 wishes to see only 20% of weight being residual waste and going away like this. So community skips may not contribute to their own objectives. Now, of course, circumstances may have changed in this area. So rather than reject the motion, this Labour administration insists on the environmental impact assessment of such a policy. Now, while fly tipping might be a disappearing problem, it's still worth an examination. So let's ask, what is the real cause of fly tipping in the city of Norwich? And the answer lies in a government that has no commitment to long-term environmental improvement. And that includes its snail-like approach to developing a circular economy, which gives sustainability. And that includes end-of-life considerations in manufacture and in packaging. The consequent unnecessary waste that then feeds into poorly funded collection and disposal systems. As the collection authority in Norwich, Norwich City Council could provide more comprehensive services in an environmentally sustainable manner, were it not for the fact that we've seen our spending power slashed by a series of governments, starting with the Liberal Tory alliance. Norfolk County Council, as the disposal authority, has resorted to charges for, among other things, DIY waste due to cuts in their own spending. This too has passed the cost to us, one of the most viciously cut councils in the country. What we really want is a proper review followed by adequate funding for local governments. And while this might not happen overnight, Lord Mayor, we must pursue this, hence the other amendments. Lord Mayor, I repeat that I welcome the airing of this issue. Properly investigated and properly addressed, we can improve Norwich's environment even more. With these important amendments, particularly the environmental one, we can support it. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Maguire. Councillor Lubbock.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I do agree that fly tipping is the scourge of communities. Streets and green spaces are cursed by inconsiderate and selfish individuals dumping their rubbish illegally. Often the rubbish is dumped out of sight of the public eye to reduce the risk of getting caught. It is unsightly, dangerous to wildlife and people, causing toxic fumes, bad smells, and above all, costly to clear up. I have no doubt that we could, as a council, do more to combat fly tipping. We could conduct a review of waste collection services, start investigations to see what partnership arrangements are to be had, and put in place greater enforcement action against fly tippers. However, I do think that COVID-19 has brought us to a very difficult time. During the lockdown, recycling centres were closed for months. Both city and county councils could not fulfil all their collection obligations. There was an increase in fly tipping, with building construction waste, sofas and mattresses being dumped. But for the last 6 months, all councils have very much been focused on essential services to help residents in various ways to get food, medicines, and ensure a roof over everyone's head, causing a huge burden on staff and financial resources. The work is ongoing and likely to again increase as we head into winter and an increase in COVID infections. Realistically, I do not think that reviews, investigations, or greater enforcement action is likely to happen in the near future. What will happen in the near future is the commissioning of a new recycling centre for Norwich, a replacement for Mile Cross in the Harford area, giving an opportunity to review the items recycled, the way they are recycled, and the amount each individual can recycle. Hopefully, no more charging for the disposal of household DIY waste. I hope that this council can work positively with the County Council on this. Addressing the motion more closely, I do not believe that disposing of bulky items is currently expensive or inconvenient. The cost of £30 for 3 items picked up from the curbside following prepayment with the council is both reasonable and convenient. I do not believe any operator outside the council would do it for this price. Reasonable residents know that throwing items away does come at a price, whether it be large items or our general waste. If one buys new appliances, then the delivery of the new appliance is often accompanied by a small fee to take the old one away. This offer to dispose of the old one should be made compulsory by law. The responsible residents will pay the fee to take the old one away, knowing that it will be broken down for parts and disposed of correctly. Somehow, we have to get everyone in the same mindset that whatever it is they are throwing away comes at a price, and that's the real challenge. The cost of disposal of normal household waste is included in the council tax. The cost of other rubbish disposal is paid for by landfill tax and is applied by material and weight. This council has a good curbside waste and recycling system, I believe. It covers household residue waste, recyclables, including cans, glass, plastics, Tetra Paks, aerosols, paper, cardboard, small electrical items, textiles, food waste, green garden waste. Could we do more? If we had resources to invest and further educate, I dare say we could. But it is, I believe, a retrograde step to introduce community skips and regular fly tipping amnesties. It will send out the message that the council will take care of it and no thought given to who will pay for these services. I was about, when the council had these community skips, they were very quickly filled with all sorts of rubbish that was then taken to general landfill. Nothing, absolutely nothing got sorted that was thrown in the skip. As soon as the skip appears, all manner of people came. They might have been people carrying on businesses and throwing their business waste in there. Who knows? You cannot police a skip like that once it's in the street. As people know, when they have skips that they pay for themselves, it's open to abuse. So I do believe that that would be a very retrograde step.
You start winding up now, please, Councillor Lovett.
More to advertise how residents dispose of their waste illegally? Yes, I believe we could. Even as simple 2 lines in the latest Your Waste and Recycling calendar, which came in the last couple of weeks, telling people how to dispose of their bulky items would be important. It's a matter of personal responsibility to ensure that one's waste is disposed of legally, and I think we should hammer that message home. I also understand that this issue will be a topic for the scrutiny in the near future, so they may be able to help there as well. But I have some misgivings about this.
Councillor Lovett.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other councillors which indicate to contribute? Councillor Stukeley.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As a councillor in one of the wards that's most affected by fly tipping, I certainly welcome this motion as amended and look forward to feeding into the work that will follow after this with some more new ideas, actually. Just on another note, the people who we work with in Town Close absolutely cannot afford £30 for their collections, because they're making a choice then between feeding their families or disposing of their waste. it must be nice to be able to have a free £30 to spend on this, but most people can't afford it. So therefore, we do need to look at another way of dealing with this problem. Thank you.
Any other councillors wish to contribute? Yay, nay. Back to Councillor Vivian Thomas.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I welcome this motion, and although I realise that there are issues involved, I hope we can come to some speedy and practical way that we can help all those people in the city who are genuinely living on low incomes and in poverty, who absolutely cannot afford any type of fee for things to be taken away and aren't in possession of a vehicle. So this is an ongoing issue, and as people lose their jobs, it's going to be ever increasing. So I do think that we need to find a solution for this cohort of people in the city. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Bergerlein.
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Maguire for highlighting a fantastic set of policies. And I think there's a lot we can talk about in terms of adopting it with regards to recycling and waste in general. We can talk about this later. I think, I mean, it's fascinating to hear the problems you've had with community skips, but I actually think those problems exactly are an opportunity for conversations and education. So first of all, I think it's not rocket science to separate a community skip into two parts where there is recycling and non-recycling. And I mean, there you've got it. You've got people coming to you. That is your opportunity to make sure people understand what this is all about and what they can recycle and what they can't. So I see the problem, but I actually think it's more of a chance if we approach it in the right way.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to contribute? Okay. Councillor Schmier, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much to all those councillors who have commented, either expressing concerns about this or indeed expressing support for it, both of the comments which I have noted, and I'd like to deal with a few of them in turn, if I may. In terms of Councillor Maguire's policies, as Councillor Bergerlein has said, thank you very much for highlighting Green Party's national policy framework. I'm sure you learnt as much as I learnt when I read them, so I hope maybe you can put them into action here in Norwich where you're not already doing so. Councillor Lubbock, yeah, I've got a few comments to return to there, if I may. Councillor Stuteley already mentioned about the £30. Yes, it is prohibitive for some members of the society. I think for me also part of the problem is the disparity almost between one item and three items. One item, it costs £23 to remove, where three items it costs £30. And I know that there's anecdotal evidence from my residents and my constituents that they sometimes leave items out, thinking, oh, I'll wait until I've got a couple more items and then pay the £30 for them all to be disposed of, which I know therefore constitutes fly tipping in itself. Another point that Councillor Lubbock made, which was about the desire for the disposal of items to be included in the price. Now, that, of course, is something that, as I mentioned in my speech, I welcome, and I think it is something on a socio-economic level that we have to move towards. And I really hope that the Conservative government at Westminster listens to the kind of information coming out of local councils saying that this is the way forward. Now, in terms of the concerns that you raised, which are perfectly valid, of course, about the amnesties and the community skips. For me, I mean, I would say that the current system is the one that really isn't working. I mean, we are seeing items that are blighting both, as I said, our countryside and our curbsides already. And yes, we have got a brilliant system in which stuff is collected very promptly, but it needs to be done in a way that surely can be made more efficient. And I think what this motion tries to do is to make that system more efficient. Ultimately, this is part of what I suppose is a sort of carrot and stick approach. The carrot is, of course, that there are community skips, there are amnesties, there is curbside collection. The stick is, of course, that if people then do get caught fly tipping, that they should really have the book thrown at them in terms of fines and potentially even custodial sentences, because fly tipping is simply not acceptable. I look forward to seeing what officers and cabinet members come up with in terms of policies and procedures going forward. And I hope that we manage in Norwich at least to do our bit to stop the blight that is fly tipping, and thank members for supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smear. We'll now move to the vote. All those against? Okay. Abstentions? No. All those in favour? Okay. That resolution has been carried. Now we've passed the 2-hour mark. We want to take a 10-minute break. Please can councillors make their mic and mute their mic and turn off their screens, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Thank you.
I have to get it back.
Lord Mayor, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Martin.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, I don't
I
think
can
any
hear
of
you,
us.
Martin. I can hear you, Martin.
I can hear you, Martin.
Martin, I can hear you.
Yeah, what's happening?
You're not alone.
You're among friends.
I can hear you and I can see you, Martin. Have they all gone home, do you think? Well, they are home.
No, you can just explain. You can only. It looks just strange because the host is sharing his screen. So Stuart is sharing his screen. Then it kind of puts the participants to one side. That's why you can only see 4. It will go back to normal once he's stopped sharing his screen.
When you're using a phone, that doesn't make any difference.
Worth bearing in mind that these little conversations are also being live streamed on YouTube.
But we are behaving.
Okay, we're back. It's a very long 10 minutes. As 2 hours have passed since the beginning of the meeting, I need to ask if the remaining items can be taken as unopposed business. Firstly, does any councillor wish to oppose the circulated amendment to item 10C becoming part of the substantive motion? Okay. Does any councillor wish to oppose any of the resolutions under item 10C as amended? No. Does any councillor wish to oppose exempt item 12? Okay. If all can be taken as unopposed business, the meeting will close. Okay.